part's simple. The trouble is all the stuff I was going to read to you is gone now. So I either have to lie and make it up or wing it and see what I remember.
That's good. Okay, but what about the lights? Because those lights
I love Frank.
High school graduation
Actually, I remember the notes from this one pretty well. It said that Guy Farmer had been a PIO, not a PIA, PIO, and that's a public information officer when he worked at gaming. And he had been a field officer in the Foreign Service officer for the State Department. And he came to work in Carson City as a journalist, and he was immediately known in the room where all the typewriters were clacking because he used all 10 fingers instead of just the 2 that the old seasoned real reporters use. Do you want to defend yourself? Or?
No.
Oh,
I brought people to defend me.
oh, good. Well, my name's Mike Fischer, and if the notes come, great, and if not, I'll wing it. And if I get really lost, I'll just go into the slideshow, read it to you, and then go back. So, as it says, can the people in the back read it okay? Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Guy Farmer, not an admirer of Frank. So, in the end of the presentation, you're really going to have to make a decision. And the decision will be purely yours. Part of the decision will be, was Frank Sinatra a good guy? Or was Frank Sinatra a good fella, as in the movie? So Sinatra, in his own defense, made this statement. Saloons are not run by the Christian Brotherhood. Sinatra hedged in later life. A lot of guys were around that had come out of Prohibition and ran pretty good saloons. I had worked in places that were open. They paid. They came backstage. They said hello. They offered you a drink. If St. Francis of Assisi was a singer and worked in these same saloons, he'd have met the same guy. That doesn't make him part of anything like the mafia.
That's prejudicial to my argument.
Is there a judge? I know there are a number of attorneys in the room, but is there a judge in the room? You're overruled. 1938. Oh, you are a gentleman and a scholar. Thank you, folks. I'm saved. A few photographs to help you understand how complicated Sinatra's story really is. Arrested for, of all things, seduction in November. Frank would have a second arrest in December 1938 for adultery. So no one's confused him with the Christian Brothers yet. Whoops, too far. One slide. If you get dizzy, don't worry, because I am. Frank, who had been under contract to Harry James, was allowed by James to sign with Tommy Dorsey in 1939. This is Dorsey, it's hard for you to see, and a very young Frankie. By 1942, Frank wanted to be on his own, but he had taken an advance of $17,000. He signed a contract which gave Dorsey 1/3, 33.33% of Sinatra's earnings, over $100 a week for the next 10 years. Dorsey wanted to retain him, and Frank wanted free. Now, I know that most of the people in the room are pretty young. Anybody have any idea who this is? This is not one of the Christian Brothers, just guys. This is Sinatra's neighbor and purported godfather, alleged mob overseer, Willie the Ice Pick Moretti. Moretti and 2 threatening compatriots visited the bandleader Dorsey. While holding a gun to Dorsey's head, Moretti explained, "Either your signature or your brains are going to be on this piece of paper down here," which releases Sinatra from his contract. Dorsey said he took the hint. I love lightweight innuendo. So just in case you were concerned that he only knew one mobster, these two guys are the Fischetti brothers, two of the three Fischetti brothers. Spelled with a C, just like Fischer, only it's Fischetti, the Italian part of our family. They also happen to be Al Capone's cousins. Frank accompanied them to December 1946 Havana Mafia meetup, purportedly carrying a briefcase with $2 million of Mafia tribute money for Lucky Luciano. And yes, that is Frankie right in the middle of the two brothers. Now we're getting right up to date and a little bit farther down. This may be even more prejudicial for you, Mike. I'm trying to make your case for you. Really working hard. And I know you'll do fine when you get there.
Keep going, Mike. Keep going.
This is Frank Sinatra in the middle, Saloon singer. On the left, far left, Big Polly Castellano. Big Polly ended up dead in front of Spock's Steakhouse in New York City, with John Gotti and Sammy the Bull Gravano watching the hit being made. Next guy, Capo Regime, Gregory De Palma. Sinatra. Sinatra's good friend and neighbor in Palm Springs of all places. West Coast mobster and close Sinatra fan, Tommy, I need to go on a diet next week, Martin. And then, no less than Carlo Gambino. Now, who's Carlo Gambino? Well, he's the namesake and godfather of the Gambino family. And then probably the biggest weasel of the world, Jimmy the Weasel Fradiano. Now, Frank didn't know any of these guys for some reason. They just came backstage and he said, yeah, no problem, I get my picture taken with you guys. By the way, you all smell like garlic. And then the coup de grace. And soon for Guy Farmer. The coup de grace, Sinatra and his alleged secret partner in the Cal-Neva at Lake Tahoe, Sam Momo Giancana, boss of the Chicago outfit. And I believe that you can, now, there's only one person on the earth breathing and taking in oxygen that was on the phone call and heard Sinatra talking to Mr. Olson. And here he is, our very own Carson Guy. You're up, buddy. I'm going to hop over the cord and get out of the way.
Thanks, Mike. You two are a gentleman and a scholar. My name is Guy Farmer. I'm old enough to be the living memory of the 1963 Frank Sinatra gambling license revocation case. I'm a lot older than I look. I'd like to start out by thanking Gold Hill Tony and his lovely wife Jill for keeping this historic place going. They moved here from Buffalo, New York, sight unseen, took the place over, and here we are.
Go Bills.
My home away from home. Tonight, before I launch into my discourse, which isn't planned and never is, and you'll never catch me doing PowerPoints, or just tell my story, I have the two most important ladies in my life. Daughter Maria, right here, urging me on, and my lovely, very special lady, Lady Beverly, as we know her up here in Gold Hill. Been going together 16 years. These special ladies in my life keep me going, and it's a lot of fun. My buddies, the two mics over here. The other good mic. So let's just go back to the beginning in Nevada, before Nevada became a state, way in the beginning, before the pioneers came across the desert, and the Indians, Native Americans, Paiutes and Washos, the others in this area, were playing gambling games with sticks and stones and bones. Gambling was always part of the Nevada territory even before it became a state in 1864. Battle born during the Civil War because they needed the gold and the silver and the extra votes. And the gambling was always part of the Nevada history. Between 1864 and 1931, gambling would be made legal because when the mines started to give out, there wasn't much else to raise some revenue, and so they would legalize gambling, and then the reformers come in and they outlaw gambling, and then they come back in. But nowhere in that pattern between the time Nevada became a state in 1864 and when it legalized gambling for the final time in 1931 during the Depression. Those were bad times here in the state. We had gambling, they collect a little money, but nobody talked about gambling control. People ran gambling games and it was pretty wide open business. You paid the right people, you stayed open, and everything was just fine. Nevada didn't move seriously to get a handle on this tiger by the tail that they had that was legal gambling until the 1950s, basically. Gambling control, we didn't have much in the way of gambling control in this state. In the 50s, and I was talking to one of you gentlemen earlier about this, the tax commission chairman, Robbins Bob Cahill, giant of a man and state chairman of the state tax commission, collected the taxes and tried to issue licenses and to do some kind of background investigation of the kind of people that were running Nevada casinos. And God bless him, because he was kind of a one-man gambling control, one-man band in gambling control. Well, legal gambling has to go hand in hand with gambling control. You have to assure the gamblers, the bettors, that you're dealing a 52 card deck and that the dice aren't loaded. And so in 1958, a young attorney named Grant Sawyer, who had been was an attorney for the Army when the armistice came along and helped draft the Japanese Constitution. And Grant Sawyer had grown up in Fallon. The doctor was some Dr. Harry Sawyer, and wound up after the war out in Elko as the district attorney. The governor at that time, the Republican governor, was Charles Russell from the Russell newspaper family out in Ely, which the Nevadans know. And the Russells are prominent to this day, as you know. Russell's is district judge down in Carson. I think he ruled on the alleged election fraud. You know, we won't go into that. We're non-political here tonight. So Sawyer, brash Sawyer, decided to run against very popular Charlie Russell, the governor here in Carson. And Sawyer ran on two platform planks. One was tough gambling control. We would let the old illegal gamblers continue to own casinos as long as they played by the rules, paid their taxes. As Mike indicated, casinos aren't run by choir boys. A lot of those old guys from Detroit and Cleveland ran illegal casinos. They knew how to run casinos. They knew if you dealt an honest game, you're going to make money, because the odds are always in favor of the house. So Governor Sawyer had a hang tough gaming control policy. A couple of the things he did. he promulgated the two-tiered system we have of gaming control in Nevada ever since he took office in 1959. And that is the Investigative Gaming Control Board, which does the investigations, does the audits, does the field inspections, it picks up cards and dice, enforces the rules, and the Parent Gaming Commission, 5-member commission of prominent Nevadans who are not directly related to the gaming industry. One I remember was Norman Brown, who was a rancher over in Smith Valley. And every year we had to take a month off so Norman could run the cows down to Bridgeport. And he was a man of immense integrity. And you know, all these years, you can count on about 2 fingers the scandals that have involved the Gaming Commission and Gaming Control Board. We're very proud of the system that Governor Sawyer brought in 1959. He did another thing. The other platform was civil rights. In 1960, Nevada was the Mississippi of the West. If you were a black person and you lived in Las Vegas, you gambled at the Moulin Rouge. And if you were in Reno, you gambled at Bill Fong's New China Club. And if you went anywhere else, they would show you the door. How did Governor Sawyer reintegrate the casinos? The last holdout was the El Capitan. The governor would call the good old boys that ran the El Cap and say, "You just threw out one of my secret agents." To my knowledge, we never had a black secret agent. Somebody told me though recently there actually was one. And there may have been. I didn't know because they were secret agents. Governor Sawyer integrated the casinos. It was a major step forward. God bless. I was very proud to be the spokesman for the Gaming Commission, Gaming Control Board at that time. But I came here in 1962 as the child AP Capital correspondent, where I was for a year and a half. The answer to the trivia question, was there an AP correspondent in Carson City before Brendan Riley? The answer is yes. There he is.
Can he type with 10 fingers?
Yeah, Mike knows the story, so I went to my first newspaper over in Yakima, Washington. I graduated from the University of Washington Journalism School, and I had taken typing in high school. Meet girls. So I could type with all 10 fingers. And I went to the newspaper over in the Yakima Republic. And there were a bunch of old guys over there with the bottle and the desk, you know, right on the front page, Walter Matthau. And there were 2 strikes against me. I had graduated from journalism school, and I could type with all 10 fingers. I overcame those handicaps, and after about a year and a half in the Capitol, where we all knew each other. Now, back in the Sawyer days, the key players, when I came in, now this is Sawyer's second term, he already had established the Gaming Commission, Gaming Control Board set up, and as I covered gaming and gaming control, I realized how important this function was. Well, I was on board with Sawyer on his hang tough gaming control policy and his civil rights policy. I won't go into the whole civil rights story, but I'm not your average old white guy, okay? Let's leave it. I was married to a beautiful Mexican lady for 40 years. This is a proud result of that. So I was covering Sawyer, and there was a shakeup at the outset of his second term, and people moved around the usual musical chairs in the state government. And Bob Fess, who later became one of the leading, along with Bill Raggio, one of the leading gaming attorneys in Nevada, moved into the governor's office, and they came after me to go to work for gaming. I was the non-Nevadan. I was the guy from Seattle and by way of Klamath Falls, Oregon. But anyway, it was a wonderful opportunity for me. I believed in what Governor Sawyer was doing. I was happy to be the spokesman on the gaming stuff. So I started at gaming in late summer of 1963. Frank Sinatra was the major owner of the Cal-Neva Lodge at North Lake Tahoe. The Sawyer people hadn't liked the way, and Gaming Control Board Chairman Ed Olson, former AP guy, knew Sinatra from the Sinatra Flying In, and then they'd yell at one another, you know, and they kind of knew each other. And so at that time, about a month later, now Frank had been warned at the outset of the summer season at Cal-Neva that he should stop running ladies through the lounge and setting up his friends. Well, Frank was always, Mike has indicated, Frank was always loyal to his friends. Oh, there's a friend of his. He was loyal right from the beginning. When he was a saloon singer in Hoboken, New Jersey, the wise guys had helped him out. He was a promising young singer, and I repeat, Frank was loyal to his friends. Later, when he was in Chicago, the Godfather was in Chicago, Sam Giancana. They helped Frank out a lot during his down period before he starred in From Here to Eternity. No.
From Here to Eternity,
From
yeah,
Here to
Mazio.
Eternity. Thank you. And it was loyal to his friends. So at the outset of that summer of 1963, Sinatra had been warned about the ladies in the lobby and about hosting his friends up there, his mobbed up friends who could come up and spend a nice weekend with their lady friend, or friends, as the case may be. The Godfather had escaped the FBI surveillance in Chicago and wound up at the Cal-Neva Club at North Lake Tahoe, where he had a romantic weekend in Chalet 50 with his lady friend, Phyllis McGuire, of the McGuire sisters. Somebody has an audio recording of that frolicking. So Giancana is there, even though he has been warned against hosting these people. Now, one of the other things that the Sawyer administration had done before I got there is compile a black book of wise guys who were not welcome in Nevada casinos. In fact, if you saw one of these people, you were supposed to kick them out. They had no rights to be in casinos. That's the original black book.
Oh my gosh.
The original 11 mobsters in there, including Murray the Camel and some very colorful people, including Sam Giancana. During this time, I don't have the timeline quite correct here, but another Chicago mobster named Marshall Caifano, better known as Johnny Marshall, filed suit against the state of Nevada. He is in, Johnny Marshall in the black book, and he got thrown out. And very sensitive fellow that he was, he sued the state of Nevada claiming that his civil rights had been violated. And I was down there for that trial, trying to think if it was before or after Sinatra, but this is a key decision because could Nevada bar, throw people out just for putting them in the book? And the answer was yes, they could, because this is a privileged industry. You don't have any right to a gambling license. The burden is on you to prove you didn't do it if you host a mobster. And it was kind of a fun trial. I wound up in a men's room next to Johnny Marshall, and hey, how's it going? You know, fine, Johnny. And like meeting Johnny Depp and anyway, the Johnny Marshall challenge to the Black Book went to trial, and the federal judge issued one of the all-time great Nevada legal decisions. It reads as follows. Plaintiff's entry, that would be Johnny Marshall, plaintiff's entry upon the gambling premises would present an emergency comparable to that presented by an animal running at large while suspected of being afflicted with hoof and mouth disease. We won the Black Book case. So Sinatra hosts Giancana. And he'd been warned about bringing his friends up to the Cal-Neva. But he did it anyway because Frank always did it his way, right? So he was rich and famous and had done some good things for Nevada, right? I mean, the Rat Pack on the Strip, and he was a great singer. My late wife loved Frank Sinatra, and he had the great phrasing of anybody. And so here we were beating up on this poor victim, and the national press just jumped all over us when we filed to revoke his license for hosting The Godfather. Mike mentioned I guess my claim to fame all these years later was, so I've been with the gaming board for about a month or so, and I'm in the office on a Saturday morning, and Frank hears that we're going to file an action to revoke his gambling license. He's not happy about that. He's used to playing by his own rules. I don't have to. These penny ante guys, Nevada. So the Gaming Control Board chairman, Ed Olson, former AP correspondent, a man of, if I had mentors in my life, he was one of them. AP connection and then being the spokesman for the gaming. And Sinatra calls him up and says, why don't you come on up to the Cal-Neva and have a nice dinner, and we can talk about this. And Olson said, why don't you come to my office here in Carson City and I'll tell you the evidence we have. You hosted The Godfather. We told you not to do that. And well, Sinatra's furious. Sinatra is used to playing by his own rules. In the phone conversation, when Olson says we're going forward with his license revocation, Sinatra just goes berserk. I'm the young guy. Ed tells me to pick up. We don't have bugging, wiretapping stuff in the office or anything, and I'm the bug on the line. And Sinatra chews him out. Well, Ed had polio when he was young, and he walked with walking sticks, like our friend did last night. And it's hard for Ed to get around, and he's in pain. And Sinatra calls him a crippled SOB. You're not a nice guy. Even though he could be a nice guy, he wasn't. So he reamed out Ed Olson and said, you're done. If you continue to prosecute this case, I'll have a big fat surprise for you. Any guess? I mean, when The Godfather Sinatra threatens you with a big fat surprise, well, he can deliver. Ed held his ground, Governor Sawyer held his ground, they never wavered. National press jumped all over us, the publisher of the Las Vegas Sun, Hank Greenspun. He'd been the PR guy for Bugsy Siegel, now I remember.
And I wore my best Bugsy Siegel check coat tonight, and my 1940s tie.
You're looking good, guys.
You're totally whackable, Mike.
Who's the other guy? Oh, and
Mike and Remike.
So Sinatra fights this, and we're in the national press, and I'm the PR guy, and I get calls from, Drew Pearson, Westbrook Pegler, and all. Why are you beating up on Frank? He's a great guy. Well, Frank has to play by the same rules as everybody else. That rule was you follow the rules, or we're going to revoke your license. And all the old illegal gamblers understood that. Now, this is before corporate licensing, right? This is before Howard Hughes came in and bought up everything. And the next governor, Mr. Laxalt, a friend of mine, political rivals, was issuing licenses to Howard Hughes in the middle of the night because Howard Hughes, as crazy and evil as he may have been, was not in the mafia that we know of. But so Hughes was starting to buy up casinos. Anyway, to cut this story short and give room to Mike Archer to present the other side of this story, Frank fought the license revocation for a couple of months. We'd gotten the decision on the black book, so we were in the clear on that. And we fought it for 2 or 3 months, and Greenspun was just tearing up Governor Sawyer, what a terrible person we were, and abusing this guy who had done so much for the state of Nevada. Now let's remember, Frank had the Rat Pack did a lot for Vegas and the Strip and got things going there. Frank also loyal to his friends, made sure Sammy Davis always stayed in the same hotel he did. God bless. I mean, he wasn't all bad. So 2 or 3 months later, his attorney at that time, before the great Bill Raggio was his attorney at that time was Harry Claiborne, a good old boy from Arkansas or Alabama or somewhere who used to rant and rave in the courtrooms, and they were all tearing up Sawyer pretty good, and 2 or 3 months later, Sinatra threw in the towel. And we had him nailed, dead to rights. He broke the rules, he had to play by it, and this is a test case for the state of Nevada's ability to control the legal gambling business. Now later, in came the corporate gaming that we have today, and it all changed. Back then, everybody had a license under their name, right? And no corporate stuff. Also, gaming outfits had to choose whether they wanted to operate here in Nevada or in other states. Now, we have gambling outfits like Station Casinos running a competition right over the state line over by Sacramento, peeling off gamblers who used to come into like Tahoe and Reno. Bad situation. I wrote about that many times and got nowhere. Remember that the Indian casinos are self-regulated. You don't know whether they're dealing you that 52-gun deck. They can do whatever they want. I don't like Indian casinos.
To this day?
So 2 or 3 months later, Harry Claiborne issues a statement, even though Sinatra had been tearing us up pretty bad, saying, well, Frank has many interests, and so he's going to toss in his gambling licenses because he's not really interested in that. He has more important things to take care of. Sinatra threw in his license for the Cal-Neva and for 9 or 10% that he had in the Sands in Las Vegas. And he gave up. We revoked his license. And I'm glad we did. It was an important milestone in gambling control history here in the state of Nevada. One postscript before I turn it over to my very friendly other part of the story here. A couple months after Sinatra threw his license in, Ed Olson is in a casino in Las Vegas, and Sammy Davis comes up to him and says, I'd like to talk to you. They go over in the corner, and Sammy said, I just want to thank you Frank has needed that his whole life. For somebody to tell him that he had to play by the rules, and everybody else has to play by it. Hooray for us. We won, he lost. End of my story. Thank you very much.
Down here for it. Frank surrendered his license, but then the board actually went ahead and revoked it also. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was a sucker punch to the stomach, and then the state got him with the knockout punch.
That was a straight right.
Sorry about the trip hazard. Now watch me trip on it.
That's my story. And
So-
I have great respect for this guy. And we'll talk about that after he tells you his story.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've now heard the argument for the prosecution. Soon, after a short audio-visual repast, you will hear the argument for the defense. Except I need my notes. So, on your left, my right, our next speaker, Michael Archer, and an absolute wonderful Nevadan who truly was a man of his word, Bill Raggio. But as far as Michael goes, he's an award-winning author. His books on the war in Vietnam are deeply personal and a reflection on his and his fellow combatants' lives during that conflict. If you have not read them, I can't encourage you strongly enough to get them and read them. It just immerses you in some of the most miserable situations you could ever imagine. However, tonight we're talking about Michael's book on Sir Bill. Senator William Raggio is an entirely different view of Frank Sinatra. This is Democrat Frank with the president in 1960. This is the start of a loyal friendship. Sinatra on the right, a little bit heavier Bill Raggio. He was still smoking and eating lots of pasta then. Raggio helped Frank in 1963. Frank Jr. had been kidnapped at Lake Tahoe, and Bill, the Washoe County District Attorney, helped facilitate the efforts to have Frank Jr. released. Pasta and red wine, a picnic in Bill Raggio's backyard with his friend Frank. Notice coat and tie. Must have been a summer picnic, no coat, just ties and shirts. This is Republican friend of the President and First Lady, Frank Sinatra, in 1980. Whoops, went too far, a step too far. Bill Raggio at his best, 3.5 steps in front of everyone else in the courtroom. And I believe that he was there 99.9% of the time. And finally, before we get to Michael,
Yeah, there they are.
I labored over this wording, so I want you to pay attention, okay? I mean, I really struggled with this. Spartacus and Atticus Finch. Being prepared to testify by Sir William Raggio at the second resurrection in Christian history. The Sinatra is relicensed. And now, Michael Archer will make sense of all of this. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why and wherefore, okay?
Okay.
Mike, did you say that Michael Archer was a Marine at the siege of Quezon and wrote
Yes.
movingly about that?
Tony, I too want to thank Tony and Jill for inviting us up here tonight, and so many familiar faces. Thanks for showing up. What I'd like to discuss, and Michael Fischer teed me up really well for this, The basic thing I want to talk about is this event here that occurred in February of 1981 down in Las Vegas when Frank received his gaming license back. But before I do that, I want to describe the non-professional relationship that Bill Raggio had with Frank Sinatra. It's pretty incredible. I was boning up on it again today, and I was kind of shaking my head. Under any circumstances, it was awkward, given what Guy just told you. Bill Raggio became district attorney of Washoe County in 1958, and he was the first one to go after corruption in the police department and the city council. And as a result of that, he had armed guards on his house, walking his children to work to school every day, and it was very difficult for him. Leading, kind of stirring the pot of this corruption was a familiar name to most of that is Joe Conforti. Joe had, he had a little business down the street here at down in the Sky. He also had some brothels in various places.
Down the other street.
Yeah, both directions. Anyway, Joe flaunted his kind of like Frank did to the Gaming Commission. He flaunted what he thought was his Nevada, his world. He could get away with anything he wanted. So Bill Raggio, as DA, every time Joe would come into town with his girls in his big Cadillac convertible, handing out $20 bills wrapped around cigars to police officers that maybe made $400 a month at the time. Reggio didn't know what to do, so he was a real scholar of the law. He was a brilliant guy. I was honored to know him. What he did was he dug up an ordinance, a Washington County ordinance from the 1860s that specifically said a vagrant, a long definition of what a vagrant was a person that frequented houses of prostitution. So on that premise, every time Joe Conforti crossed from Story County into Washoe County, Raggio had him arrested. And I saw a picture of Conforti's first booking sheet, and he listed his occupation as rancher. I thought that was
Mustang Ranch.
yeah, Mustang Ranch.
Triangle Ranch.
It was not
First the Triangle, it's not Triangle Ranch, that was fun.
The Triangle Ranch in 1959 was Conforti's brothel operation out Highway 80, then at Highway 40 near Wadsworth. And the reason they call it the Triangle Ranch is there are 3 counties converge there. And Conforti had built these buildings out of railroad ties and in each of the counties, and had the furnishings at that particular time in Story County. And when the heat would get on in one county, they just moved the furnishings around these 3 buildings. They were only a matter of a few hundred yards from one another. Well, Story County DA Bob Moore got together with Raggio, and they decided to send Conforti a lesson. One of the last straws was a UNR student had gone out there a couple of weeks before and wouldn't leave, and so Sally Conforti, who was Joe's wife, shot him in the foot, and apparently his folks were pretty well connected. So Moore went out there, and Raggio and Bill Farr, who was the fire marshal for Washoe County, and they went out there and they torched they let the employees out, of course. And Bill Farr went in there and found the perfect place to burn the building down. And Raggio, of course, was orchestrating it, but had Bob Moore light the match because it was in Story County. So, but Bob Moore and Warren LaRue, I mentioned, he was a good friend of his, and you may have known him too, I don't know. But long story short, even though Bill didn't like the match, he got plenty of political traction about this event over the years. In fact, when I moved here 45 years ago, and you mentioned Bill Raggio's name, the first thing he was at that time a recognized state senator and leader. They would say, "Oh, he's the guy that burned the brothel down," right? But I was disappointed when I did my research to find out he didn't actually burn the brothel down. But nonetheless, this story is important because why? Let me just fill you in a little bit before this, because it's important about why Sinatra and Raggio met and became friends. So Frank, Joe keeps getting arrested for vagrancy and decides to do something about it. So he tries to set up Raggio with an underage woman at the Riverside Hotel. Raggio's building is in the courthouse right across the river, and consequently that falls through. And Joe is arrested for extortion and tried in a trial that, because of its salacious nature, was international. I mean, it was Herb Cain was up here, and everybody was here covering that. And Conforti was convicted. The girl decided not to testify against Senator Raggio and said it was all made up. The girl tonight was brought in from California. Her sister was an employee, a prostitute at one of Joe's ranches. Joe went to jail at the Nevada State Prison for 28 months. While he was there, it was like a country club. While he was there, he there was, I think it was called the Bullpen, the casino. The casino. He ran the casino in the prison. And this is the irony. I've seen pictures where everybody's in prison down and he's in a cashmere sweater and Italian slacks and seriously. Well, this is interesting to me, and I didn't realize this at first. Someone pointed it out to me. It was illegal. This was the only industry that Nevada was training their felons for. They didn't have any other school.
Oh, come on, they were making license plates.
This is just as bad. So they're ostensibly training these guys to go out and become casino employees, and they're learning their craft. Well, it was against the law for felons to be hired to work in casinos. So it was ridiculous. Anyway, they were just doing it for recreation. So Joe Conforti, the day he gets out of prison, the federal government has a tax evasion solid case against him. He doesn't even get in the car before the feds arrest him, and he goes to McNeil Island for a couple of years. Now he's really mad about that because this isn't club fed. This is a tough prison, and it changed him, and he started. So right about this time, as Guy mentioned, Frank, he buys an interest in the Cal-Neva Lodge with his buddy Skinny D'Amato. They all have these great names, and Hank Senicola. And Dean Martin wanted in, and then he backed out at the last minute, wisely so. So Frank opens the club, and the guy told you the rest of it here. So as far as what they were looking for, he invites Sam Giancana there. Giancana, some people have claimed because the state line runs right through the middle of it, that Giancana was never in the casino. He was just in the cottage on the California side. Yeah, okay. So consequently, he didn't violate the black book. I'm just saying, guys. Anyway, so Herb Cain's up there, and he was one of my favorite columnists for the Chronicle for many years. And Herb Cain, I'll synopsize this quote, but he said he was up there and he saw Giancana sitting in front of that cabin, and he said you could distinguish him because he wore a hat at Lake Tahoe, and a tie, and he was receiving guests. So he knew that Herb Cain saw him on the premises, or on the California side of the premises. Just saying. So Frank.
Are you sure Chalet number 50 is on the California side?
I know I'm not.
But we're just trying to be traditional.
There's a legal term I call reasonable doubt. That's what I'm trying to set there. Okay. Anyway, but long story short, as Guy mentioned, Frank had some seedy characters up there. And consequently, the Gaming Control Board was doing an investigation on him. Before the investigation was announced, the Chicago Tribune announced that Sinatra was being investigated by the Gaming Control Board. Sinatra was furious because he thought Ed Olson, who had been a newspaperman, had leaked that, which Ed Olson did not. But so this is Labor Day weekend. Ed's working Labor Day weekend, evidently, and you and him, right?
Yeah, I'm in the office.
So coincidentally, so Frank gets off the phone with Ed. Coincidentally, there's a scheduled visit by two gaming control officers to check the
auditors.
Yeah. They walk in. It's Labor Day weekend. Frank yells across the casino, "Get those dirty SOBs out of here," to Skitty D'Amato. So Skitty decides, I'm going to handle this with aplomb. He slips a $100 bill into the crook of one of the Gaming Control Board elbows. And the guy goes, "Is that a bribe?" And he said, "No, I just appreciate you civil servants working on Labor Day weekend." So anyway, that's where the beef started. So I won't get into what Guy talked about. I mean, it was all that. Frank finally surrendered it. And so that's how that began. Now I'm going to step back to 1960, 3 years before this. Bill Raggio is the DA. He goes up to the Cal-Neva. It's in Washoe County. He's a top cop in the county. A person may have name recognition to some of you, Sonny King, who used to be a lounge entertainer, a singer at Lake Tahoe for many years, and it was also the straight man for Jimmy Durante's act. Well, Reggio and Durante become close friends before he meets Sinatra. And Durante spends time at Reggio's home at Robin and California Street when he's up the lake entertaining. The Cal-Neva drew, the Riverside had up to that, excuse me, the Mapes up to that time had been the kind of entertainment center of Washington County, but for a brief period, the celebrity showroom at the Cal-Neva had everybody in the world up there. Louis Prima, Keely Smith, you name it, they were there. Marilyn Monroe, and Frank and Marilyn would get up and sing for their supper and entertain the people up there. It was a real hot spot. And so anyway, so of course, Senator Reggio and his wife Dorothy go up there. Sonny King introduces Frank Sinatra, says to Frank Sinatra, "There's Bill Reggio." And this is what Bill Reggio told me in the interview. He said, he knew I was top cop, but he came up to me and he said, "I want to thank you for, as an Italian American, for going after a loudmouth, blah, 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 Joe Conforti. He's a disgrace to us, and I appreciate the courage you had to do this." And so that began their friendship. This Italian-American thing I want to step forward just a bit on, because this was supported by something that happened in 2011. Many years later, I was in New Orleans with Senator Reggio. He was at a convention there, and I just tagged along to sell some books. His wife, Dale, went to visit her mom in Florida, and so an acquaintance of his who had been in the National District Attorneys Association took us to a club called the 1175 Club on Magazine Street. And it was owned by a guy named Joe Segreto. And Joe Segreto is we walked in, and it turns there's these Tony Bennett original paintings, on the wall. And it turns out Joe Segreto, as I found out later, was a very close friend of the singer Tony Bennett. So we go to the bar, haven't seen him yet, and we're standing there, and Reggio, who any of you knew him, was absolutely hilarious guy and would just entertain people for hours, keep everybody in stitches. He's working the room. And this gentleman comes up, and he's in this blazer with gold buttons, just absolutely the old world distinguished, and he's very, very humble. He waits for Senator Reggio to get done talking, and he says, Senator Reggio, he said, "My name is Joe Segreto," and he said, "When in the 50s, late 50s, I was in a Philadelphia doo-wop band, and we were working Lake Tahoe and Reno, trying to pick up gigs." And he said, "You are our hero," and this is in 2011. He said, "You were our hero because you were one of the few Italian Americans then, and one must remember that the Kefauver Committee hearings were going on, and Italian American males were being labeled automatically as gangsters." He said, "You were one of the few models we had that was in law enforcement, and it was going." And he said, "I waited my whole life to thank you." I was sitting from me to Maria for that conversation, so I know it to be true. So getting back to this, Sinatra, this is where their bond is from. And those of you that know that culture, it all depends on where in Italy you're from. Joe was from Italy a little farther south than Sinatra's immigrant ancestors, and Senator Reggio being a fourth generation Nevada, but from northern Italy, immigrants. So, okay, let me see where I've gone back. Okay, so. Reggio becomes his friend, and he puts, instead of a picture of J. Edgar Hoover, he puts a picture of Frank Sinatra in the lobby of the district attorney's office in Washoe County, just to needle him, which was, and if anyone knows J. Edgar Hoover's ego, that was a needling. Guy mentioned that in December of 1963, well, let me step back one more. In September of 1963, Governor Grant Sawyer was in with President Kennedy, who had a 90-minute stopover in Las Vegas to give a speech. And Sawyer was there, and everybody was there. Reggio, of course, wasn't up in that level of politics yet. But Senator Cannon was there, and Bible, and they were all in the car. And Senator Kennedy said to Grant Sawyer, he said, "Why are you hassling my friend Frank?" One has to remember that Frank was a huge Democrat, and that he and Kennedy were so close that Kennedy was actually, or excuse me, Frank was actually the organizer of all the inaugural balls in 1961 when Kennedy was inaugurated. So they were very close. So Grant Sawyer in his book Hang Tough says, he replied, Mr. President, you take care of the country, I'll take care of that. And Kennedy said no more about it, but Kennedy had been pressured clearly to talk to Sawyer about Sinatra's gaming license. Well, getting back to the friendship between Bill Raggio and Sinatra, as you saw the picture, Sinatra would come down. That house was on the corner of Robin Street in California, and Leslie Raggio would tell me that for that particular picnic, I don't know, many of you know the character of Kilroy from World War II with the nose and the eyes looking over. Well, the whole neighborhood was staring at Frank every bite he took. And as far as the pasta, Frank loved Clara Raggio's, Bill's mother's pasta. She had a special dish she cooked for him. In December of 1963, Sinatra sent his kidnapper for late. He called, Harry Claiborne calls Bill Raggio and says, can you take care of this? Sinatra flies in, as you saw the picture, that was on the Reno runway. And they try to get up Spooner to the lake. It's around Christmas time, it's freezing, there's ice all over the road. Just the two of them, the car spins out a couple of times. They finally come back to the Mapes and set up headquarters, FBI, all that. Clara's over every day with pasta dish for Frank. Frank's very grateful for this. And if in my book, I won't get into it now, but from his interview with me, Bill Raggio said that he had a lot of time to talk to Frank, waiting for the kidnappers to call, and got to know him. And he said that Sinatra would say that I believe Sinatra had imbalance emotionally, but he would say that some days he felt really good, and some days he felt really bad. And on the days he felt bad, he'd punch a reporter or something, and bad Frank. So his guy was joking earlier. Maybe there were, or Mike was. Maybe was a good Frank and a bad Frank. I don't know. But Frank Jr. was these clowns that tried to kidnap him. It was an absolute joke. It was, and consequently, in fact, Frank got on the phone and said, "I'll give you $1 million," and they said, "No, we only want 240,000." These guys were.
We don't want a reportable incident.
They'd have to do the math 3 ways again. Anyway, they were arrested immediately after Frank Jr. was released, and I always wondered, as a kind of a litmus test, if Frank were connected to the mob, how these guys survived in prison. Just in the back of my mind, but they all lived. So Frank was very grateful to Bill Raggio, and these are some of the perks that he did for him. And just going over real fast, then I'll get to this. The one I liked, when Bill was visiting New York City, Frank called Joe DiMaggio, and Bill Raggio and Joe DiMaggio watched a Yankee game at Yankee Stadium in a box together. The Yankee Club. The other ways that raised a few eyebrows was that in 1963, Joe Conforti was trying to get back a candidate to push Bill out of the DA's office so he could take control of the council again. His name was Rick Weiser. Anyway, he was a Conforti-funded candidate. So Frank Sinatra heard about it, and he was performing in Oakland, California, and asked Bill to drive down there, and Bill did. And Frank wrote him a check for $25,000. And this is 63, and I calculated this in 2008 when I was doing the research. This is equivalent to $134,000. This is a pretty good campaign donation. And again, the eyebrows had to go up a little bit, but that's the thing that I think everyone will admit. These two gentlemen, there was no question about Bill Raggio's integrity. And I asked him about this several times, especially when after Frank died in 1998, and a Freedom of Information Act released what turned out to be a 2,500-page dossier on Frank Sinatra, ever since the 30s. And it was kind of hard to overlook some of the acquaintances he had made. But he also did some good things. And the first part of the dossier was he was, back in the 30s, he was investigated for being a communist because he was a civil rights advocate, as Guy mentioned. And so Hoover started looking at him for that. Again, some of the other things he did, no, they're escaping me now.
Yeah.
I got off track. Anyway.
Yeah.
Say it again?
Yeah, he did for graduate
Oh, thank you.
re-election.
God. Anyway, and there's so many, but thank you. So he's running, this is in 1970, I believe. No, this is an earlier campaign. Anyway, he's running, I forget which election it was, he ran many times. So Sinatra contacts him and says, I want you to come down and we're going to film a professional ad for you. And so Bill and Harry Spencer, who was a journalist for many years, still around, fly down there, and a limousine picks them up. Well, Frank had a doctor's appointment and couldn't come. So Bill figured they were going to a recording studio. Well, they went to Paramount Studios, and they drove through the gate, and they went to a big sound stage, and they went in there, and they were filming a movie Frank was making called Come Blow Your Horn at the time. Bud Yorkin and great producers and directors. So they're just startled. And they look over, and Frank Sinatra had Raggio's office in the Washoe County Courthouse, the interior of his office, duplicated on the side stage. Every detail, everything that was on his desk. It was kind of creepy, actually, when you think about it. But, and it was the first time Bill had read a teleprompter, and they did this really amazing commercial that he'd never done anything like that. And he said afterwards that he thought he lost votes because for Washoe County it was a bit too polished. Not to say that Washoe County were bumpkins or anything like that, but it was just too Hollywood to sell, and it probably hurt him in the long run. So to leap forward, did we talk about it? Was it Mickey Rudin or was it Claiborne that called him about this in 1981? I think it was Rudin. Okay. Anyway, so a little, and I'll be off here in a minute. I found out a fact, or read a fact today that I'd forgotten about. So Frank, once he loses his gaming license, he doesn't try again. So Sam Giancana lives in Oak Park, Illinois. He's having dementia problems by 1974, when the Church Commission is investigating the CIA's Castro-Kennedy assassination plot, and then there's going to be a House of Representatives is going to re-examine the assassinations of both the Kennedy brothers. Well, so Sam Giancana is kind of a loose cannon by now, and he gets whacked in the basement of his house in 1974. A bunch of shots to the back of the head, one saved for the mouth. I know it's gross, but that was a message that he was going to talk to these committees about that association. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but 1 year later, Frank decides to go in with Hank Greenspun and one other colleague to buy 400,000 shares of Del Webb Corporation, which owned 5 casinos in Las Vegas, which would have given him 8% control of those casinos. The minute Del Webb finds out that Frank Sinatra is involved in the contract, they back out because they know what's happened to him in the past. So I believe by 1981, this is the impetus why Frank wanted his day in court. The funny thing is, and many of you know this, there was a law called the Sinatra law, which said that an entertainer didn't need a key employee license it had already been decided.
He could be on property, but he couldn't be in ownership.
Right. So what Sinatra does is he contacts Bill Raggio, who's just won a great case with Paul Loudon, and has become now known as one of the best gaming attorneys in the state. He's also a state senator, but that's a part-time job, as you know, in the state. So don't read too much into that. Anyway, so long story short, he goes down to Frank and Barbara home in Palm Springs and researches this case. Frank spends $500,000 of his own money for a 2-year investigation. The FBI gives them what they can, but it wasn't a complete story. So long story short, in February of '81, they go before the Gaming Control Board, which Richard Bunker is the heading it. And that's where these pictures appeared. The Gaming Commission was actually a week later. So what happens is Frank, his character witnesses included these 2 gentlemen, and I love what Mike said about Atticus Finch. Come on, kill a mockingbird, who's gonna? This guy's gold. Anyway, so that's all I'm saying, guys. Anyway, so it included a letter from Ronald Reagan, who'd just been inaugurated president, attesting to Frank's good character. Bob Hope wrote. Sheriff Pritchard of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office drove all the way to Vegas to testify. Just a myriad of celebrities saying that this guy was gold. You know, he was a humanitarian and so forth. So the Gaming Control Board says, yeah, we're going to pass it on to the commission for final review. And a week later, Harry Reid is the commissioner of the gaming commission, chair, excuse me. And what's interesting is Frank brought General Wald, who was the CEO of Caesars, because Caesars was actually the one spearheading this. Peter Echeverria, who had been the chair of the gaming commission, was the lead attorney for Caesars. I mean, Frank had it all lined up here, you know. I mean, and so anyway, they breezed through this pretty well. They don't have the high-powered witnesses at the gaming commission, but they do have a few people show up and testify. Ned Day, who was a reporter, I don't know if you knew him back in Las Vegas at the time, he said it was a lead pipe cinch, so the audience didn't even show up. But anyway, so Sinatra, with the exception of Carl Dodge, who decided that there was that picture you saw of Frank hanging around with all those gangsters, that was at the Westchester Dinner Theater. And there was a trial going on at that time to that Marston guy, the one that Mike pointed out his weight problem. He and another guy went to jail for that, skimming. Frank had played there when that picture was taken and gotten $800,000 for 1 week of work, which was a pretty good chunk of change. But the other reason Frank did this is because the guy, Jimmy the Weasel Fradiano, had just written a book, and turned Fed, and written a book called The Last Mafioso. Now, I always say, why would these guys trust a guy with the name Weasel to begin with? I mean, you got a nickname Weasel, you're not going to talk in front of the guy, right? Well, they did. Okay. So, long story short, Jimmy the Weasel accuses Frank of being in the pocket of these guys, and that's another reason that drove him to spend $500,000 to get this. Carl Dodge, who was a state senator at the time as well, with Raggio, a Republican, he said, no, this isn't right. We should either give a temporary license or wait until this trial's over. And he was overruled. And so Frank got his license. He didn't need it, but he got it, and he felt that his name was clear.
The judge has a few questions.
Thank you.
So, you said that, if I remember correctly, I'm trying to channel my best Bill Raggio, but I can't hold a candlestick to him. You said that, I think, Sinatra was pretty good friends with Kennedy? You would attest to the fact that he was pretty good friends with him?
When you showed a picture of them together.
Well, I was just wondering how you would confirm that Judith Campbell Exner was Kennedy's mistress and Momo Giancana's mistress, introduced to each individual by our buddy Frank.
Well, you know, I read it in some books. I mean, again, I did, as an example, Kitty Kelly's book, and Pete Hamill, who wrote Why Sinatra Matters, mentioned it as well. But and by the way, if I could say this, Pete Hamill was a great writer. He said that Sinatra was the most investigated entertainer in American history this side of John Wilkes Booth.
I like that you pointed out what a wonderful gentleman Bill Raggio, and what a wonderful, not a hardline politician cutting the sand, much of what we see today. He knew how to make things work and keep things going along. And he was truly a fantastic gentleman. You said you had a little bit of rebuttal, and then you get a little bit of rebuttal time, but I had to ask the Exner.
No, and you know, I can't remember whether it's...
She was a very good-looking woman, too.
Yeah, I can't, you know, here's two things that weigh into that, in my opinion. You know what, it may have been in the 2,500-page dossier that was released in 1998 after Frank. I can't attest to that. But the fact that Bobby Kennedy, when he talked to Hoover, immediately, you know, gave the axe to Sinatra, I don't know. That kind of makes you wonder if there was some smoke there.
Oh yeah, no, Frank went from building a heliport in Palm Springs so that Kennedy can come stay at his house to having him stay at whose house?
Bing Crosby. Yeah. And Bing Crosby was a Republican, and that Sinatra said that. So Frank became a Republican after that.
You did.
Right.
It's always good to be flexible in politics. Guy.
Well, just Just a couple of observations about that. It's exactly what happened when Frank got his license back 20 years later, and the deal was wired when Atticus Finch and the president and Paul Laxalt, that's all he had. You know, he was going to get his license back. No money was involved. He was licensed as a key employee. When I left the Sawyer administration and Paul Laxalt had defeated Grant Sawyer for a third term, I was ready to move on anyway, and I went with an outfit called the U.S. Information Agency, USIA, which Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright killed. But when I had my security interview with these people, they knew that Grant Sawyer had called Hoover a Nazi for bugging, wiretapping legal casino owners. And the U.S. security people said, "Did you write that speech?" I said, "No, but I wish I had." And one other thing, during the investigation, and I'll give this to the Gaming Control Board, so our former office manager, Jack Stratton, is on the board 20 years later. And I'd written to Jack saying, "Are you going to give this guy a license? Because you know exactly what happened." They sent an investigator, a colorful character, to Madrid, Spain, where I was stationed with the American Embassy, Sully de Fontaine. And we were friends. They had a few beers, a couple of drinks, and Sully invites us to stay at his house in the Carson Valley next time I'm on home leave. So he takes all my testimony. Frank Sinatra's a terrible person and challenged the state should never have a license. And my letter is up against Gregory Peck. He's going to get his license, and he got it. If I wanted a license, I was Frank Sinatra in 1980, I would hire one of two attorneys. I would hire Bob Fess, who was Grant Sawyer's top guy, who I succeeded at the Gaming Control Board. I would hire Bob Fess, passed away, or Bill Raggio. All-time great. I mean, I knew Raggio, and he was funny and smart, and what can I say, you know, even though he represented Bad Frank.
So one other factor that probably had a great deal of influence in Sinatra being relicensed, Atlantic City had basically legalized gaming, and casinos were going up there. And the Northeast market was a big fly market for Vegas. And Atlantic City posed a real significant threat to that fly market. Sinatra had enough juice and pull to be able to bring those people from the Northeast back to Vegas. And that was also, I believe, a contributing factor. And you all have to make the decision as to whether it's good Frank or good fella Frank. But I want to add one other thing. I'm a firm believer, having read a lot of the FBI records and then read Sinatra's testimony, that he quit telling the truth right about, well, just before he said, "I do."
Are you finished? Because
I'm done. If you can top that, just step right up.
I totally concur with that. I read the same records. Frank did say, I didn't know these guys. I never met them. I hung around with. I mean, he did, and the record refutes that, and as do a lot of witnesses. So I can't argue with that. I want to tell you what. When I brought this up, Senator Raggio, what he said is, he said, and this is after Frank died in '98, and these records did come out. The FBI gave Raggio what they could, what was classified. So as a good attorney, and you have to remember Raggio was a friend, so it was kind of, again, an awkward situation. He said we had to go with what we had. Whether or not Frank was lying at the time, I couldn't tell, you know. Okay, I see the smile. All right, but let me just close by saying this. Okay, in 1964, right after all this happened, and I know there's still a gray area there, and I got with it. I think Raggio firmly believed that, and told me this, that Frank, he didn't believe Frank ever had anything directly to do with their criminal enterprises. He more or less did this because they helped him along the way, and he was a loyal friend. In 1964, Bill Raggio from the Little Washoe County was elected District Attorney of the Year in the United States by the National District Attorneys Association. And 3 years later, he became president. And he was going against guys in Manhattan and Chicago that were going after these same guys. And the mission of the National District Attorneys Association had 2 missions. And the second mission was to help district attorneys with organized crime matters, training, information, intelligence, and so forth. And to honor him, one would have to say, and no one has ever, I mean, some of his political opponents kind of, the innuendo was always there that he was connected and this and that. But the fact of the matter is no one ever questioned the man's integrity that knew him. And I think the District Attorneys Association really put the imprimatur on his character because if there had been anything untoward, they would have sniffed it out.
And then there was Sinatra's first attorney, Harry Claiborne. Harry Claiborne was corrupt, became a federal judge. He had some connections. He was impeached and removed from office. That was Frank's first attorney.
One of 2 in the United States.
Can I interject something real fast? I know people want to get home. But Frank Claiborne was tried, Joe Conforti tried to strike back to get rid of a $29 million income tax debt in 1984 and lied to the federal government and said Claiborne had taken 2 bribes from him personally. The trial was held on Booth Street in Reno. Oscar Goodman, who was mob attorney, was Claiborne's attorney at the time, asked Bill Raggio to step in because Oscar was very inflammatory and always walked on the edge of contempt of court, and Raggio was more paced and respected, and consequently Raggio proved Conforti was lying. He subpoenaed a passport agent from New York City who testified, and the evidence was in Joe's passport that he was physically in New York City the day he claimed to be on Booth Street. One of the bribes was in those apartments allegedly right next to the federal courthouse there, across from Reno High. He was in New York City at the time. So Harry escaped the bribery charges, but as Guy mentioned, he didn't escape the income tax evasion. And if I could just interject one thing, I interviewed Oscar on this too, Oscar Goodman, and he said that Harry Claiborne at that time had a real serious drinking problem, and that if he beat the bribery charges, if he had just said, it was an accounting error, I screwed up, I'll pay it back, nothing would have happened. He probably still would have been on the bench. But he didn't want to do it.
We're in Story County. Joe Conforti ran Story County for years, for as long as he was here. I'm sorry we don't have David, the Emperor of Gold Hill, still with us, because he knows that he wrote the Conforti biography. But Joe Conforti always had 2 Story County officials on his payroll, the sheriff and the district attorney. No names because I don't want to blaspheme former friends of mine.
Are there any questions? Anybody have questions?
Questions?
If not, we thank.
If I could mention one thing, if anybody's interested in this story, I have some books, Bill Raggio's biography here for $15 if you'd like me to sign one.
It's a great read.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We'll see you at the next one.
Yeah, exactly.
Great information.